to start the first discussion session presently with the following statement. Technological digitization started over 2 decades ago. How has the professional communications landscape changed as digitization became omnipresent? And why is it important to understand this? Lily, would you like to respond to this?
Okay. The early years of digitization, of the digital age, I think a lot of information came from the PR practitioners about the company or whatever you want to communicate with them. You could hold a press conference and just call the traditional press and some digital journalists together, and after that you can still have a cup of coffee. Then you can get back to journalists and the journalists just get the story out. But now, it's quite different. Previously it was just a linear fashion, just do one thing and it all leads to the results. Now of course the landscape is very different. With instant messaging, being the norm in communication. We want information from our phones, receive it from our phones and from digital channels. We want information in bite size. They want it to be fast, quick. We want videos. The audience they want the information creatively packaged, because there are lots of other things that will attract them. So right now PR has evolved into some kind of if I may call it, a big digital hub. So we are competing against a lot of other channels that can get their attention. All right. Why is it important to know this? Well, I think it's important to know all this because it's not just enough to push the content out. One has to know how to package it in a way that people want to digest it. And you also need to make it relevant for Google. Otherwise, you can't be ranked high in the searches. So you have to think of also the social media right now, because you have to use them as an outlet for your branding. You got to be present everywhere, ubiquitous. Because the average person uses not just a handphone, they use numerous devices, and they can watch TV, they can pair their TV with their handphones, tablets and whatnot, So PR now have to work very differently, all right? And it's a lot more work, definitely, And things have gotten faster, but definitely it's more measurable than previous times when you just have press clippings, then you hope that, well, it's getting through to some people, all right? And now, of course, you can't have sleep also. You can't have the coffee nor the sleep, all right?
Great, so what are your predictions about how digitization may further impact the PR industry in coming years? Justin, what are your views?
Well, I mean, maybe I can just add on to some points that I guess Lily was sharing. And I think my personal view is that what Lily mentioned was I would term it the disintermediation of communications, right? In the past, you had a few large organizations run by professionals where the news comes from a particular source. So PR professionals deals with them directly. But nowadays, right, because of social media, I mean, any Tom, Dick, and Harry with internet connections, any one of us, and of course, if you are savvy, we can have the same reach as all these large organizations. In previous conversations, I always share with people that you compare the new paper and with Xiaxue. In fact, if you combine all the reach together, Xiaxue actually has much more reach than the new paper, right? So this is one of the main, I would say, differences in how PR technology has changed public relations. So in the past, you deal with few people, deal with professionals to get your message out. But nowadays, it becomes very complex, and PR professionals need to deal with many different stakeholders, many different platforms, right? And so the biggest change, of course, is that people are now more vocal, right? In the past, one person says something. If you're a professional, if you are someone of authority, you say it, people accept it. But nowadays, I mean, all of you are young kids, right? All of you are students. Your parents or someone tells you something on social media, you're like, this is rubbish, right? This doesn't make sense. And then you go and voice your own opinion. So as a PR professional, I think you need to realize that the complexity is greater, as in the past. And you need to be, I guess, a jack of all trades right? And I always tell my colleagues, who I work with, that communications or PR now is no longer me telling you something. Communications today, right, is about me engaging you in a conversation and helping you to see things my way. Right? I hope you will see it my way, but I cannot force you to see it my way. Right? So that's what I add on to, I guess, what Lily was saying.
Yeah.
So
yeah, maybe I can also tell something. Yeah, never mind, go ahead. Have you finished?
Yeah. Go ahead. I was going to go on to the second question, but go ahead.
Yeah, okay. I thought that it's quite true that people need, it's no longer pushing the content into people who don't think, All of them, young people like yourself, have thoughts. And the other thing was, as you said, we need to be engaged. And also we are not so, we are definitely, younger people these days are absolutely more educated and more thinking in a sense, okay? And and they need to, I think they need to be persuaded. I think now PR has to be a little more, you have to be more like engaging them on at their level. It's a level that it's not a top down or push it into you, okay? So, I mean, not that we're not thinking, Justin. I'm just saying that maybe our generation was more, we keep our thoughts ourselves and then we just try not to rock the boat. But now I think people want changes and they're not afraid to say it, right? Yeah.
So in the past, right, even if we disagreed with what the newspaper said, we had no channel to tell people, right? We just complain to ourselves, complain to our friends. But now we can complain on social media and people can see what we are saying. Right? So I mean, there's a slight difference in technology and so on. So yeah, but society has changed too. I think that's important. So then we're moving on to Nicole's question about my predictions about how digitization will affect the future of PR, right? Personally, I see 4 major trends that are affecting PR. The first one, I think, is the loss of trust in what is being communicated online. Nowadays, like Donald Trump has made this phrase "fake news" very popular, right? Everything is fake, right? No one knows what to trust anymore out there. So I think at the macro level, what's affecting PR now in the industry is this lack of trust. Nobody knows who to believe anymore, right? Even like things that come from reputable organizations like the Wall Street Journal, the Straits Times, and things like that, right? People always question whether it's true or not. So I think that's one of the biggest problem we're facing. The second problem that I think, or second major trend is actually the corporatization of social media, right? Facebook and so on, they always tell you, oh, I'm making things more user-friendly for you. I'm giving you more content you want. But to me, it's not true. Facebook is there to make money, right? And especially since Facebook is now listed, Mark Zuckerberg is out there to try to maximize profits. His decisions in the recent years, not to so-called correct politicians, right, on what they say, not to determine. It's not so much about free speech. It's because if you look at it, to win the US presidency, right, the budget to win, the amount to spend, they spend about $1 billion just to win the presidency. And the US has so many elections, right? There's the mayor, there's the governor, there's all the judges and so on. So to them, it's a huge kind of market, right? And then what drives their decisions is not about free speech. It's about corporatization, about making money. So that's the second thing I think is affecting PR. The third thing I think about is privacy, right? People nowadays are getting more concerned about what they share online, right? So how do you then actually communicate with them? Because if the channel is no longer there, people are moving away from mainstream media. And then if people are now moving away or hiding what they share online, so how do you then communicate with them? So this is the third thing that I think is affecting the future of PR. And last but not least, I think one of the questions someone has asked earlier was about artificial intelligence, right? Artificial intelligence is there. And how do you then actually communicate in the Internet of Things? The future is not so much about what you want to see. Imagine now a world, right, as you interact with your various devices, your devices, where you go, you drive and see. But the artificial intelligence can pick up what you're doing, and then they can actually shape information that you need. So as PR professionals, I think we need to understand these 4 major trends, and understanding them will then help you understand what the opportunities and threats, right, and how you can then leverage all of these to then position the messages for your clients. These are my thoughts on the prediction. I just hope it gives you an insight and piece them together. And I don't have all the answers, but I know that we're moving in these directions. And to be effective PR professionals, we should be able to try to determine our position in these 4 trends. So Lily, have anything to add?
Yes. Yeah. Okay. I thought what you said was really what's going on in the world right now. The lack of trust and all that. And I think companies need to be more authentic when they do their PR, because it's not so easy to, well, I think the audience they are facing these days are able to spot if you are fake or not. So, you really got to walk your talk more than ever before. You can't just advertise your how good you are, because you got to show it, and you have to even convince your employees to be your ambassadors, right? Am I right, Justin?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, actually, what you say is precisely correct, right? Nowadays on online social media, you say something maybe in 1990, okay, that's too far back. Maybe you said something in 2010. Then you say something today. Somebody will go and pull up what you say in 2010 to say, hey, you're lying, right? In 2010, you say this, in 2020, you're saying this. So it's become a very complex world. And like what Lily mentioned, PR now is about being authentic, right? About being consistent, being true, and being yourself. Because people will then dig up what you've done in the past and say, hey, you are not consistent in what you're saying.
That's what happened to some politicians. They always pull it out. Okay. And yeah, talking about robots and the digital age, and I'm always very, very sort of mesmerized by Elon Musk. Actually, he's got SpaceX and then all this self-driving. Wow, it's like too good to be true. One day you don't even have to get a driving license. Just buy a car and the car will drive you. Is that wonderful? And is that going to happen to PR, Yeah, we just press a button. Don't have to go to get a degree. Press a button, a software, and then you can, get an event like MOU done. Wow, just need 2 persons to do the whole thing. Is that great? And then press a button again, press release, done already. But can it be automated? Because a lot of things these days are automated, like the chat bots, we don't even need all this customer service anymore, right?
No,
but,
I think we shouldn't demoralize all these students to tell them that AI is going to take away their jobs.
No, I'm just posing. I'm posing. But the fact is that part 2 of it is, if you wonder that it's happening, but it's not. The reality is that PR is more complex than that. It's a thinking thing, thinking and PR requires strategy, thinking, and it's far more complex than what you think. So, the predictions, although some parts can be automated, I mean, it's a people business, and we never like to really talk to, machines, We rather, talk to human beings, and PR is a social thing as well. So people like to, machines, one of the big problems with machine, although efficient, they are not sociable, and people prefer to talk to people who can answer, and so that's the future. People can never be replaced by machines.
Okay, great. So based on your respective experiences, what are the most crucial soft and hard skills needed to successfully operate in today's PR industry in the digital era, and why? So Lee, continuing on from your experience with AI, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, soft skill wise, okay, I think, people management skills to me is quite important, because no matter what, in PR, you don't work in isolation. You got to work with a team, you got to work with your bosses, you got to work very closely to a whole array of people. You're not like an accounts department, you work just with your department and that's it. But you have to interface with the different levels of management. You got to be very persuasive. So the soft skills, I think you need to be adaptable, you got to be also able to persuade management to take certain steps, Usually you're sandwiched in between. So soft skills are very important. And in terms of hard skills, I think the basic writing skill is really still important. Okay, the ability to communicate and write is quite crucial in PR.
Well, for me, well, talking about soft skills, well, I believe adaptability is very important. On top of that, you also the ability to learn, right? I always say this because the only constant is change, right? Things keep changing. Currently, we're all using Facebook because Facebook is the predominant platform. But who knows, right? TikTok is coming online. You have WeChat. You have many, many different platforms. So as you embark on your career in PR, I think for the soft skills, you need to be adaptable, right? And you need to actually learn as algorithms change and things like that. How do you then adapt or move and to move the times, right? Every day, I guess Google is changing the algorithms. Facebook is also changing the algorithms. So if you're not able to have this ability to learn, like you try something, you throw it out there, and then you sit there and pause. Hey, how come it didn't work so well? How come it even worked well, right? Have a theory, understand it, then you try again the next time. And each time as you improve and you learn, then you get better, right? And I think that's one of the most important soft skills that I think any PR professional can have, especially when you deal with social media. With regards to hard skills, I believe that data analytics is the big thing now, right? There's this big demand for comms to be efficient, for comms to be effective, right? And because social media, a lot of it is real-time data. Right? I can throw out an ad out there. I can know almost immediately how many people read my article, how many people click on my link, how many, where did the link go through and things like that. So data has actually given us a lot of opportunities. And if you ask any large organization out there, everybody keeps talking about data-driven comms, data-driven communications, right? And everything is about data. So if you ask me, my sense is that data skills, data analytics skills, understanding how to make sense of data is it's important hard skill that any PR professional can have. And I think as students, right, you are fantastically well positioned to do this. My generation, Lily's generation, even Marcus and Nisa, we never had all this, right? And we are not even trained, right? Of course, we go to YouTube and so on to learn, but I think most of you are being taught that in school, and it is something that's in demand out there. And if you can position yourself to have this knowledge, this hard skill, I think many organizations will want to at least look at you and talk to you and see how you can bring value to the organization.
I'll start the second discussion section presenting with the following statement. COVID-19 has adversely affected the global economy. While the PR industry has also been impacted, new opportunities have nevertheless emerged for PR professionals. What are some of these opportunities and why should we pay attention to them? Lily, what are your thoughts on this?
I can't hear her. Can you all hear her?
Sorry, Ms. Lily.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay, yeah. I was saying that the pandemic has definitely led to a lot of fears, and the stock market has come to a standstill with a free fall, I would say, and travels at a standstill, and the healthcare system is overburdened, lots of things. And even the grocery shops and supermarkets are impacted, okay, people rushing and all that. Okay, so there's plenty of news, frankly speaking, for journalists. It's like a field day for them. Every day, lots of pandemic stories. So if you ask me opportunities, if you ask me if it's from the story angle, yes, I think there's plenty of news for them to cover. And frankly, also, well, for the companies, of course, it may be hard to get any news out anymore because it's like everything is the focus on the pandemic. So, but it's also a good way to tell your story for the PR professionals in another way, okay, from the COVID angle. But you have to be careful because if you do capitalize a bit too much on it, you might find that people feel they're exploiting it. All right. So, I mean, it's a good time to show the human side of your company if you're a PR professional. All right. And that's one of my thoughts, okay, about opportunities for PR.
Justin, what are your views?
Well, I mean, when you go back to public relations, right, it's generally always about building relationships. It's never about money. Okay, of course it's about money, but okay, but you don't communicate that, right? So it's always about building relationships. And if we look at what the pandemic has actually shown us, is that relationships, people are very critical, right? People out there now, businesses out there are actually struggling. Many of the businesses tell themselves that, hey, this is happening. So they cut down on advertising, they cut down on the activities. But what happens when you as organization cuts down is that it creates a vacuum, right? And people, when you're out of sight, you're out of mind. People don't think of you anymore. And when this happens, the more savvy, the more adventurous, or the more aggressive competitor will start filling this vacuum. Right? So for PR, I think it's important for companies to continue to be out there. And because PR is not about advertising, it's about how you build mind share, how you build relationship. You can then continue to actually engage with help companies engage with their existing customers, or even with new customers to build relationship, right? And I think as Lily has mentioned, you need to be sensitive, right? Don't go and do a big splashy kind of PR campaign when people out there are suffering, people are losing their jobs, right? It's also important to make sure you get your message out there. And more importantly, right, when I mentioned about building relationships, when people out there now are suffering, and if you are kind to them, you treat them well, like for example, if you are a vendor or a supplier who can't pay you, right, the company might say, oh, I want to take legal actions to recover money. But you put on a PR hat, how can you turn this into a PR, I would say, effort to show people that you care, that you're partnering them in this crisis, right? By building advocates now at this point of time, where people need friends, people need to build relationships, people need to have partners out there. I think when the economy subsequently recovers and people are looking, or companies are looking, who should they do business with, right? They remember that during their time of need, you were kind to them, you were actually understanding with them, and you actually build a relationship with them. So to me, the crisis has brought a lot of opportunities, and it's how you actually leverage them. Right? Understand that PR is about building relationships, and it's about building and positioning yourself for the future.
I think I totally agree with Justin. All right, this is a good opportunity for you to build your brand or your relationship with your audience. And I think Grab has done a good job in the sense of, something they did, they started this thing called Grab Cares, and a lot of people want to avoid healthcare workers during the COVID time, and they provided free transport from hospital to home, which is quite admirable, I thought.
It is, right? And I think like Lily, you mentioned, right? You shouldn't make this into like a PR spin, right? Because people can see through it. Razer tried to do it. I mean, I think Razer, they want to give out masks, right? They tell people, oh, it's a campaign to give people masks. But at the end of the day, when you find out, right, you got to submit your IC, passport, all the information, right? It became a PR nightmare, right? So be nice to people, but don't take advantage of them. I think it's critical. That's what Lily said. And I think that's a very strong point for PR professionals to remember during this time.
So given the constraints of COVID-19, or circuit breaker, or the confinement measures, what are some major online challenges for PR practitioners currently?
I mean, okay, so the main challenge is this, right? Relationship, PR is about relationship. People talk about online, and so I believe online helps you build awareness. It helps you connect with people. But online cannot build relationships. Right? Eventually, you need to meet up with the person. You need to shake hands. You need to drink coffee together. You need the face-to-face interactions. So to me, I would say that the major crisis or the major challenge for us now is that while we can maintain contact, we can start building relationship, there comes a point where we need to start moving moving offline, right? Moving off online to offline to start building a relationship with people. And the challenge for us now is how can you do this safely in the most cost-effective manner, right? Yeah. So I think that's the current major challenge for PR practitioners and professionals.
I guess online challenges is the loss of personal touch. PR is always been a bit of a personal touch and people industry. So, I mean, for practical reasons, you have to stay away from people. You have to wear a mask. Yes, but you need to smile behind the mask. I feel that you try to do what you can because, I mean, health comes first, I'm quite sure, okay? And but I guess for online challenges, like, okay, let's just say a webinar like this, okay, I'm just thinking, yes, it's you can't feel the crowd. So that's a bit, in a way, something you have to live with, because you can't feel the crowd reaction to whatever you say. So it's part of the whole thing, okay, packaging of, I mean, when you host an event or something, you do find that this kind of thing is one of the elements of PR, you know, to know how the audience feel about your messages, all right? But I guess now you have to be creative about how you do PR, because, you know, you have to blend online and offline kind of thing together, you know. Maybe, you know, I know some creative companies have even come out and delivered something while they're having their online seminar on. Offline, they send you something, a message, courier it to you. Perhaps, you know, you may have to do something like that. I mean, because I think this is here to stay, you know. I mean, it's not going to go away so fast, you know, the pandemic. So it brought to light the importance of even an online presence sometimes in crisis.
Yes, I agree. So I would never expect the first time I moderate a panel discussion to actually be online. So this is one of the major online challenges that even I, as a PR undergraduate, is actually currently experiencing. So with that, I believe that we can conclude the second discussion. We're now open to any questions from the floor. We will start with a question we've actually received earlier in our Google form. And in the meantime, for all our participants here today, please feel free to input your questions in the Q&A box below. So from our Google form, when is communicating too much a bad thing in this new pandemic? Have the OB markers, OB meaning the boundary markers, for PR engagement shifted during COVID-19? So Lily, would you like to start with this question?
Okay, just some thoughts of mine that communicating too much, when is it too much in this crisis? Well, if I count the number of invitations I get to webinars and virtual events, I think there's lots, you know. So, I mean, sometimes there's a kind of fatigue you get, you know, and then also, you know, Zoom meetings, whatever, just after a while tires you out. So, well, I guess it can get a little too much, you know, too much of this communicating. It's exhausting, online especially. Okay, is there another question you have for me?
Yes, there is.
So maybe I add on to Lee's point about communicating too much. I mean, personally, I feel that in a pandemic especially, right, there's no such thing as over communicating, right? I personally feel there's this fallacy that, oh, I say one time people will know, right? But information environment is very noisy, right? And I think a lot of times you realize that I say something, I communicate something at this particular point of time. If you're not interested in it and you're not paying attention to it, you will ignore it. Right? So, I mean, coming from government comms, we always have this belief that I have to keep communicating over and over again. Each time I communicate, maybe 20% of Singaporeans know it or hear it. I communicate again, maybe another 5% of Singaporeans hear it. Right? And we have to keep doing it over and over again to get our message out. And I think for this pandemic especially, I think one of the issues is about trust in communications, trust in the communicator. That is fundamental. If people don't trust a communicator, no matter what you say, nobody will believe it. And I think the challenge now, a very classic example, they always compare the New Zealand Prime Minister, right, Jacinda Ardern, and us, right, and some of our local leaders, right. And I always have this issue is about being authentic, being real, right. COVID-19 is a very complex thing. Nobody knows what's happening. Nobody knows how the virus is evolving. Right? Every day we learn something new. What was valid 2 months ago is no longer valid. But then there's always this challenge of, do I come out and tell people, this is what I know, to instill confidence? Or do I tell people, hey, actually, I don't know what's going on, help us figure out the way, and we move forward. So there's always this big challenge, right, for communicators. Do you want to then establish your trust, your authority, to get people to follow you? Or do you want to show vulnerability, to show authenticity, to then get people to trust and believe you? So this was, I think, a challenge that people are all talking about now in COVID-19 as a pandemic. as a PR professional, I think it's important for us to understand that there's always this dilemma and always this challenge, right? Do you want your spokesperson, do you want your CEO to go out there and show vulnerability, right? But then people trust him, right? The next time they hear, oh yeah, no, you're honest, you're truthful, you don't know everything, but let's work together to solve the problem. But then again, some people say, no, I'm paying you so much money, you must know all the answers, right? So what do you want, what do you do? So I think as a communicator, we need to understand there's this dilemma. And what you choose, I think, will determine the future of how you progress for your company or for your organization. But you ask me, I always believe in being truthful, because in situations like this, you never know what's going to happen. You never know how you evolve. And I believe being honest is what society wants now. As a youth, right? I don't think you want people to tell you exactly. And I think you can accept people not knowing if people are honest with you.
Great. So other than being truthful or being authentic, what do PR companies actually look out for in resumes? I think this question is actually extremely pertinent, especially for all of our undergraduates here today in the comms or in other sectors. Is there any specific thing that actually will make you go, you're hired? I was you're fired.
Oh.
For me, being authentic is very important, right? I always tell people and I always tell my colleagues, right, that integrity is a zero-sum game. Either you have it or you don't, right? And I personally dislike people who come and maybe say exaggerate what they do, right? I have people who come in and say, oh, I'm 3 years, they have 3 years experience at a particular job. Oh, but they ran this international campaign that brought in how many $1 billion for Singapore. Then I'm like, hey, you're only a junior executive. How can you be running it? So to me, it's a red flag for me, right? Because if you are exaggerating, to me it's a lie. I don't like that, right? So to me, integrity is important, right? But what do you say? What do people want? What does people want a resume, right? I would say you must look at it in the context of the company you're applying for. Different companies need different things, right? You need to actually position your resume accordingly. But what I always look for is this. I believe that everybody that comes and applies has the basic competency, right? Like Nicole is no different from, I guess, I don't know whoever's out there, right? Whoever your colleagues, you're all about the same, right? How do I know it's different? But I look for things like intangibles, right? How adaptable are you? How willing are you to learn, right? In fact, we recently hired someone and we asked her whether she can do something. She said she can't, but she told me, hey, don't worry. I'm prepared to go to Google. I'm prepared to go to Udemy. I'm prepared to learn online and I will deliver what you want. To me, it's this kind of attitude because as I shared earlier, the adaptability is important, right? I know what I need today for my organization. I don't know what I need tomorrow. And if you are fixated and you can only do one thing, right? When my organization shifts and we move, let's say next year, you're irrelevant to me and you cannot grow with me. So to me, if you ask me what I look for and what I think most PR companies are looking for, is this intangible ability for students to be able to adapt and to be able to learn on the go, right? And being willing to say, I don't know, but I'm willing to try and learn. So I think this is something that's important. And if you ask me and we can convey this, you're hired. Not fired, hired.
Okay. I truly agree with Justin regarding the authentic answers, because I do a class on interview skills, and basically we know that there are all kinds of lies that people do. I mean, they want to tell people what they think the interviewer wants, but actually it's good to say I really don't know. I don't have a lot of experience. However, I'm willing to learn how to do something. All right. And I mean, for me, yes, I think most times most people are qualified. It's just a matter of personality fit and sometimes other intangibles like the sense of passion in a person. Okay. And what jumps out at me when I look at resumes is, besides academic qualifications, does the person take an interest in outside, have an interest outside academia, for example, or something like a volunteer group or something. So being in the student chapter, I always think that, hey, you do have to have time to do this. You know, if you are in a student chapter, it shows that you have interest in your career, in maybe your in a profession or something. So I look for this kind of thing, affiliation to professional associations, or even things like volunteer work, because volunteer work is optional. Okay, and if I see that you give tuition to underprivileged kids, I mean, that jumps out at me too. That you don't mind spending your time without, to help the underprivileged, and it speaks of passion, demonstrates that you be a good citizen in your workplace without being paid, for it.
So actually, earlier today, we actually received a question from one of our attendees. So we'll check the Q&A box now. So with the cancel culture trending across the world now, how should PR professionals deal with this phenomenon when your brand or a person linked to your brand is being attacked? So our president from IPRS actually has answered this question, but would Justin and Lily have something to add?
I mean, cancel culture, things like that, I would say very cost-based. And as I mentioned to you earlier in the beginning, is that society has changed, right? Everybody has a view. Nowadays, it's like you say one thing, there are at least a dozen people who have different views from you, right? But how do you actually deal with it? I would say, I think depends on the organization. And personally, I would say that everybody needs to be true to themselves, right? If, for example, you truly believe in something, right? And somebody goes out there and challenges you and questions you about it. If you truly believe that that's the right thing to do, then I think you should stand behind it and stand your ground, right? Because out there, no matter what you do, there'll be somebody who will always disagree with you, right? And if what you're doing is not immoral, it's not illegal, then stand your ground. I mean, that's my personal view, right? You cannot give in, because once you give in, then what do you become, right? Everything you do and everybody's challenging you and criticizing you, then how does it go? Well, of course, I think the caveat is this, that it cannot be something that's illegal or cannot be something that's immoral, right? Then I think that's wrong. But everything else, right? I mean, it's up to you. If there's something you truly believe, then stand your ground. And hopefully enough people will come and stand by you. I think there's this guy called Kapanaki, right? He took a knee for the blacks, Black Lives and so on. He stood by what he wanted. And although many people dropped him, I think Nike took him on board. Right? So I think out there now, the key point about cancel culture is that everybody has a view. You need to then decide for yourself whether it's something you truly believe, and then stand by that. And if you think it's wrong, admit it's wrong and move on. But you must be true to yourself.
Well, I tend to look at it as constructive, because if a person can stand up for and and tell and say that this person did wrong and it should be should not be up there, then I guess it's and they have good reasons for it. I don't see anything wrong with it. But of course, the only problem is that sometimes it can have a life of its own, and after that it becomes a big of a I think it's rather negative, especially when they look for things that's in the past, or they want to knock down something, establish a brand for some for having a celebrities. Sometimes there could be other intentions behind that using this. So I can see that it can be open to people manipulating it especially those people who want to create confusion.
Okay. We also have another question from one of our attendees today. So, how do you ensure that individuals will be able to communicate effectively during a period with so many restrictions? Face-to-face communication allows us to be able to communicate our message clearly with other methods other than talking, example, the body language. So how do we do the same thing in a virtual setting? So Lily, would you like to start on this question?
Okay, how can you ensure that? Okay, well, body language, yes, will be missing, but I guess we can look at, I still think that, there's certain amount of body language that can be put out, say, in a virtual environment, okay? For example, like now, I mean, we can still look at the top part of our body, and the voice does say a lot, all right? It's a warm voice, or the tone, the tonality, that's just another way of doing it. So it's not just, the language is how it's put across. Perhaps that's one way to get around it. The eye contact, we can still, there is a certain level of body contact, language above the chest up lah, I guess. That's all you can do at this point of time, and sometimes all these emojis and all that emoticons or whatever, does communicate something. I mean, these days, even when we are able to see face to face, a lot of people choose to use emoticons to communicate their feelings. Yeah.
Well, my own personal thoughts on this is that communications, of course, it's not only one point of contact, right? You have to, maybe you can talk. So to me, to be effective, you need to communicate through various modes, multiple modes. You can communicate via phone call, communicate via video conference, and communicate perhaps by email and so on, right? So my suggestion is that it's very good that you acknowledge that there's limitations through virtual communications. Is then understanding this, how do you then use other multiple platforms to actually mitigate or these shortfalls? Right? I honestly don't have the answer, but what I can say is that you just need to be aware, and it's good that you recognize that these limitations, and then use as many platforms as you can to then get your message across, right? Keep communicating, and that's the only way, right? And over time, we just can hope that the person gets the message. And if you use data, right? Use data, get feedback. Maybe do a simple survey or whatever it is, right? Get a sense of whether the person understands what you're saying.
Earlier, Mr. Justin necessarily mentioned that a hard skill is needed in the PR communications world is actually data analytics. So, or how data analytics would help in PR. So we actually received similar questions in our Google form. So Lily, would you like to add about how data analytics will actually impact PR?
I think I think most of us, lots of students are really learning this in even their first year right now. Okay, we have this course, and it's good to have understanding of these of how data analytics work. But beyond that, I think there's interpretation of it, of facts, is quite important, because you can't have the tools. You can learn all the tools, but it's finding what you make out of it that makes a difference. Okay, and picking the right, amount of what you want to what you want to survey on. Okay, because data can do this much. You can tell you a story, but it depends on what you put into it. Okay, so just like all the search engines, they can help us, do research, but we need to, there's still, you got to judge, you got to analyze it further. So that's the other part that has to be taught.
Then how does PR play a role in this?
How does data support PR, or how does PR support data? Okay. If you ask me, like I said, data is the next big thing, right? And I am currently have the privilege of setting this up for A-Star. So my team, the two guys that we have given the headcount to employ to do this, I tell them that what I want is very simple. Before every campaign, before everything I do, you must tell me, I'll give you the outcomes that we want, what management wants. Then you must tell me using data who I should talk to, right? Then you must tell me what I should say to them. You must tell me where I should communicate with them, when I should communicate with them, and how I should communicate with them. So to me, at the end of the day, if data is so effective and they can drive my communications, then ultimately this will lead to us being more effective. And this is what I call my vision for data-driven communications. At the start state, you do that. So how data supports that. In terms of how PR supports data, I think it then comes down to the question of how do you get data, right? As I shared with you earlier about privacy, people are very concerned about privacy now, right? Then how do you then start building relationships with the right people to establish the trust that whatever data that they give you. You will so-called protect their anonymity. You will use the data for legitimate and moral reasons. And then that's how you can continue to build a database. So it is a cycle, right? And I think ultimately, to me, the promise of data-driven communications is for me to be effective, more effective in how I communicate.
I think I think that what Justin said was yes, is really quite true, because if in the end data analytics does help measure PR performance in some ways, okay, there is a link. I have to say that you know, before it's a guess. Now you can actually, you know, tell after a campaign, you know, how or something, you know, something you did, you know, whether it was well received, you know, through data analytics.
So we have several other questions, but because of time constraints, we may not be able to answer all. We'll just choose a few more to answer. So we have from the floor, how do you suggest to deal with international relationship in PR? What do we need to be aware to deal with relationship? Okay, so I believe the question is asking to deal how you would like to form a relationship with someone of a different cultural background.
If you ask me, people are the same, no matter where you live, right? People want to feel loved, appreciated, and things like that. I mean, of course, these are things I would say are very common things, right? So if you go back to the basics of PR about building relationship, I would say most of the principles are the same, right? How you deal with them and what they want, things like that are very common. But of course, as you go international, different cultures have different preferences, different nuances and things like that. What you say might be acceptable in Singapore, might not be acceptable in another country. So I'll give you an example, right? In countries like the US, right? If a politician has a sex scandal, or even Singapore is frowned upon, right? But if it happens in a place like Italy, right, where it is actually celebrated, so then of course there's a difference in how you respond. So that's why, if you ask me, there's of course why you have international firms. International firms will then be plugged into the local culture. And for PR to be effective, I mean, you need to take care of the nuances. But at the bottom line, building relationships is about the same, right? How I respect you, how you respect me. And I think that is the basis of all PR. And I mean, to me, that's the fundamental. It doesn't differ from country to country.
Lily, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I guess I think, for example, I think there are some big differences though. I would say that when a person is quiet, for example, maybe in Japanese culture, you know, it doesn't mean that they have nothing to say, you know. They just don't want to be communicated in. Maybe they don't communicate because it's cultural, yeah. But they do have a lot to say. So sometimes we have to really be culturally aware that that is actually silence is not like, it's like they have nothing to say, you know, or even or you know, I think the stereotype is Americans can be quite they may talk all the time, but doesn't mean that you know. So that is something one has to know about culture. That is, I think it does have a big impact on PR though, because sometimes we may have a universal message, but it may be read differently. I mean, by different cultures. But you're right also, Justin, in that, saying that, you know, certain messages are always very generic. You know, I mean marriage or
Universal,
love,
yeah.
the kind of thing, universal. Yeah. It's quite you know, everybody wants a happy ending, you know, peace, harmony, that kind of thing. But you know, the other things there are some things that you may have to colors and all that. You know, in certain countries you just no to black. You know, it's not for certain things, for events. You know, although in maybe in certain countries, you know, it may be like, wow, you know, so chic. You know, black is or white.
So talking about messages, and earlier as you were talking about xiaxue, we have a question from our attendee. As influencer marketing has been on the rise, should PR professionals engage ambassadors who have a mass outreach potential but have a controversial brand image and a notorious track record? Example, racism or sexism? So, Mr. Justin, would you like to start first?
So maybe I will just throw back this question, right? Is all publicity good publicity? Nicole, what do you think?
I don't believe so.
I believe
I don't
so,
think
right?
that all publicity is necessarily good.
Yeah, so I would say that if you ask me the question about influencers who have, I would say, negative, gets a negative perception or a negative brand, I would say it depends on what is your outcome, right? If your brand is something that is very controversial, or something that's in your face kind of thing, I mean, you might want to consider it, because then, of course, it reaches a particular audience, right? Xia Xue, for example, right? Just for example only, she does have her followers, and her followers naturally follow her for a particular reason. It's because perhaps of what, of the values, of the way she communicates and things like that. So if that's a particular market you think you want to reach out to, then Xia Xue might be the influencer for you, right? But if you're selling something that's more wholesome and so on, and you want to avoid controversy, then perhaps she's not the person for you. So I guess my answer to that question would be, it all depends on what is your intended outcome for your particular campaign, right? And because every influencer does have a different audience, does has a different reach, I mean, she must have, there must be a reason why almost 1.5 million people follow her, right? She cannot be for every reason, so you need to follow. But I think what we also realize nowadays is that society is changing, right? In the past, when she made some of these comments, people just laugh it off and so on. But somehow in recent years, or maybe I would say even in the recent year, this has become a bit more controversial. Right? Whether certain comments you make might no longer be accepted. It might have been accepted 2 years ago. What you comment now might not be accepted. So I would say it just depends on what your outcome is, and you need to be aware of, I would say, the responses that people have towards your particular brand. And by understanding that, then you can determine whether or not you want to use that particular influencer who has a negative, I would say, branding.
Lily, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I suppose, yes, even, I mean, some people can view that as being authentic too, being bad,
Yeah.
I mean, this kind of thing, it resonates. You can't be all white, I mean, so good, you're a saint. So again, it's the brand. What does it represent? And, Apple was actually a brand. In the very first logos, there's a bite in the apple or something like that, It's like a so-called controversial brand at that point. It's a cult brand. It started off that way, but then along the way it became like quite wholesome already. I don't know. But when it first started off, they had people like all kinds of cult figures, in their campaigns, representing Apple. But now I noticed Apple's look, its culture is, it's quite different now. Because when it first started, it was a cult brand fighting against the big boys. So, evolves, I guess. Things can evolve, and what is seen as like bad is now good, and good can be really, they want to be more wholesome. It evolves all the time. So I don't know, this norms, societal norms could be one of the things that PR, practitioners must really look into, because, if you are in with the times, you've got to be observant. You can't have, that's why you need, frankly, in a team, you can't have only certain generation. I find that you have a multi-generational team. You may look at for different things and have different opinions. That's what PR is about, frankly,
So maybe just to end off, I think that it's important to acknowledge, right, that societal acceptance or societal norms are changing, right? What is important today or what is right today might be wrong tomorrow, right? But even though what is right today and wrong tomorrow, there is some segment or some sense that what you're doing now today is not acceptable. So talking about maybe some of these off-color jokes, about racism and sexism and so on, right? Yeah, now it's tolerated. It's tolerated, but it's not right. But if you go along this branding or pushing something along something that's tolerated, then in future, then it can come back and bite you, right? But if you stick to certain core principles of branding or certain what's universally accepted as correct, right? Then I don't think having a campaign along those will come back and bite you. So I guess the point is you must know the difference between what is universally correct and what's being tolerated before you move into this kind of a campaign, right? Because being tolerated can come back and bite you in future.
Okay. So
If I may, Nicole, I would actually like to ask a question.
Yes, Dr. Rava.
Oh no, I'm scared now.
Well, okay, look, actually, before the event, I had already thought of questions to ask you, which of course are of relevance to many of our participants today who are studying PR, graduate finishing their studies, and wanting to get a job in PR. And my original question was going to be about digital, big data, and also about like automated PR practices. But guys have covered that already, like, earlier on. So let's leave that aside. So thank you again for covering that. However, my question follows up from a comment that was made to me some years ago when I was attending some event of some kind. That comment was made to me by somebody not from the PR industry, but from the business industry. So when they asked me like, oh, what do? I said, I train students to become future communication professionals in the context of PR, in the context of the creative industries and media and so on. And interestingly, the reply was, well, they are not needed anymore because anybody who's got a social media account can do PR now. So my question to you is, as many of our students are about to graduate and look for jobs, how would you advise them to respond to that comment when they're looking for jobs?
So your question is that nowadays, because of technology, anybody can.
Some people believe that simply because somebody is very good at managing a social media account, whatever it is, that makes them that's your PR person, so you don't need PR professionals as a result. Is that some people believe that? So how do you help students respond to that if they receive that comment?
I personally think there's this issue now of the University of YouTube, right? Anybody who wants to do something goes to YouTube, he finds something, he can do it, right? But my question is always this, right? Although you can learn and do anything you want, in every profession, right, there's always this element of professional responsibility, this element of having in-depth training to be able to actually deliver better quality. So for example, right, people talk about, you can know how something is done, right? But you might not be able to understand why it's being done. And then if you cannot understand why it's being done, then you do not know how to so-called modify your strategy to suit the situation. So I would say yes, anybody with a large social media account can actually be an influencer, can communicate for you. But there's always an art behind it, and there's always a deeper understanding, as any profession has, on how to actually use communications and to use PR to actually become more effective to accomplish your goal. Right? I'm not denying that many things can be done out there. You can learn on YouTube, but as a profession, right? PR as a profession, there are certain things we know and which other people cannot know or do not know because they have not spent the time studying it, right? And if you have 15, 20 years of experience in PR, there are certain things that you can pick up just by looking at something to understand the issue. And crisis comms is a very big thing, right? You can read about it, you can know about it, but at the end of the day, do you know why people say certain things a certain way, right? That's only something that experience can give you. Right? So I guess my answer for your students, if people challenge them and say, sure, anybody can do PR, but can you do effective and good PR, right? That's where the difference comes from someone who is trained and studied it for many years, as opposed to someone who went to YouTube to actually learn it. So that's my view from a practitioner point of view. So maybe Lily can give you the academic point of view.
Yeah, I guess, I mean, I do know some people are pretty talented. There's a lot of self-taught chefs, they can cook at home and they think they can turn out something fabulous. Anything can be done, even, the outcomes seem to be quite good. But it's the reasoning and the rationale, like what you say, Justin, and frankly speaking, I learned PR along the way because years ago there was no mass comm and stuff. And I went back and actually taught, and And when I went through all the books, I realized that actually, you know, my boss may be wrong, you know, in the application of it. So, I mean, the framework you have to have is something that you know, that's why you need to, frankly, you know, study it, actually, have some theory of it, or some academic background for it, because it's not like you learn from your, you know, it's, you know, if you learn it from the job, I mean, your boss could practice this and you can't modify it. You don't know why she's doing it this way. It seemed to be the right thing to do. But frankly speaking, you know, if you know the background to it, it's not applicable, you know, it may not work in another industry. So I find that, you know, when you know, work in different industry, you realize it's practiced very differently. So it can be quite confusing. And so, you know, you might want to, you know, think about it, yeah. A lot of them say that they can pick it up on their own, but the truth is that you do need to have some solid theory behind it.
Yeah, so building on that, right, I think that as PR professionals, you need to continually learn, right? So after today, after your graduation next month, I urge you to continue to develop yourself in this profession. Read widely, have conversations with your seniors, join IPRS and interact with us, you know, because profession is a profession. It's continual learning. Every day you learn something new. Every day you need to deepen your knowledge, right? Because if you can't do that, then I would say you'll be just like anybody else who goes and watches YouTube. Okay? So I think that's important. If you want to take this as a profession, have the mindset of continually learning and improving yourselves.
Thank you, Justin and Lily, for responding to my question. Your comments just now, I think, will be very helpful to our students, especially those who are about to graduate, complete their studies, and go and look for a job. So that will really help them and give them more confidence, you know, in sort of establishing, like, you know, their importance as PR professionals currently. And on that note, due to time constraints, we probably need to, like, you know, close off our webinar soon. And because, you know, we've reached the end of it. And I thank everybody for the questions you sent. Some of them have been answered, but it's not going to be possible to answer every single question. But thank you again, everybody, for attending. And on that note, I'll pass it on to Nicole to conclude today's session as we're coming to the end.
Yes, thank you very much, everybody. We have now come to the end of Present. On behalf of the UONS-IPRS Student Chapter, thank you Ms Lily Lim and Mr Justin Fong for your insightful responses. And thank you, our audience, for your kind attention.